All right, I just want to give you a brief introduction to what we're going to be doing in this unit. We're going to be looking at Western Europe after the fall of Rome. So, this is medieval Western Europe, but this is just the first part. Our second unit is going to get into the late Middle Ages and look at the development of some of our modern countries. All right, so just to recap, with the fall of Rome, remember, Diocletian divided the Roman Empire. And after the fall of Rome in the West, the East had become the Byzantine Empire. But now we're going back to the West. What happens in the West? And we call this period of time the Dark Ages. And we're going to have a few developments because of that. So I want to talk about what is or what and who are controlling the areas and what happens because of new groups coming in. All right, so Dark Ages make up for about the first 500 years of what we call the Dark Ages. I mean, of the Middle Ages, excuse me. So we're looking at a period from about a 500 to 1500 with the start of the Renaissance. All right, foundations of early medieval society. There are three basic foundations for what Europe looks like at this time. The first are the Roman culture and traditions. Just because the government of Rome ended did not mean there weren't certain ways of life that continued. But again, no Roman government and no Roman military. And this is going to cause them new problems and have to develop a way to survive this period of time. Culture remains. The second foundation of early medieval society is all of those Germanic tribes who came and settled this region: the Franks, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals. All of them were going to be introducing new ideas, introducing new languages that will mix with Latin and become what we know today as like French and Spanish, etc. Um, and then the third foundation of early medieval society is going to be the Christian church. Save the best for last. I'm not really getting specific into the Christian church, but I want you to be familiar with them. They're all that remains behind. You can imagine if everything stopped in your civilization: no more government, no more economics, nothing. Who would you turn to? You would turn to the church. They provided people with social and spiritual support, and it will definitely become the most important institution. All right, let's practice. So let's look at some of the new invaders that are coming in. Some people refer to them as a new wave of barbarians, and they are the Vikings, the Magyars, the Angles, and Saxons. Another group could be added to this, and that would be the Muslims. But since we kind of covered them in Islam, I'm not really adding on to those in these notes, but just be aware that Muslims are out there as well. All right, the first group are the Vikings. They originate from Scandinavia, which includes the modern countries of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, a little bit of Finland, but not much. An overpopulation and lack of resources begins to send them southward. And we saw that in Russia, where they began to use the rivers as highways and migrate southward. So they used these boats that you see here called longboats. And why they were superior ships is that they were shallow enough to traverse rivers, but strong enough to go along the coastal areas as well, out to sea. So that gave them a unique position as far as attacks. Eventually, these groups will convert to Christianity. They're going to settle in areas of Russia, what we already talked about, France, and the British Isles. So you're going to be learning a lot about the Vikings coming up. Here shows some of the Viking invasions. Up here is Scandinavia. It's the northernmost part of Europe. And you can see they've traveled all the way to Iceland, Greenland, and America. A lot of Great Britain has settlements from the Vikings, including the city of Dublin, Ireland. They hit coastal regions of France and Spain and made their way over to Italy and huge impact on Russia. So they're really going to be spreading their culture just about everywhere in Europe. All right, let's practice. Magyars. Magyars. Magyars originated from Asia. And if you look at this image of them, they're very similar to other groups we've talked about, the Mongols, the Huns, the Turks, great horsemen, um, were able to be superior archers. But they're also being pushed into Eastern Europe by another Asiatic group, the Mongols. And they're going to settle in the area that is now modern Hungary. Hungary, a Central European country, really owes a lot of their heritage to the Magyars. Again, superior horsemanship and military skills, and they would typically not move into Western Europe and settle. Rather, they would make these quick raids into Western Europe and they would kidnap people and sell them as slaves. So, needless to say, when you saw a bunch of horsemen riding your way, it was run and hide because the Magyars were coming. So they were a particular threat. Eventually, they too will kind of stop their raids and really settle in the area of Central Asia, Central Europe around Hungary. All right, let's practice. The last group I want to talk about are my ancestors, the Angles and the Saxons. About the same time, you can see here in Britain, you have other groups seeking new lands to farm, and they're coming from what was called mainland Europe or continental Europe and making their way across the North Sea and what is now the English Channel into Great Britain. I think I've said before that Great Britain is a mutt country, and it really is. There were groups, of course, already living there. Celts is a group, sometimes referred to as the Britons, um, and a group called the Picts, who were supposed to be really low class barbarians, I guess you could say. And so you've got all of these different groups moving in and forming this new messy land of Great Britain. Um, they the two main groups we're going to talk about though are the Angles. You can see here come from what would be northern France or and into northern Germany. Um, and then the Saxons, who also come from the area of northern Germany. And they began migrating in waves into Great Britain. There was a warring between the different groups. You could imagine all of these different groups trying to uh, share the same space. You kind of see that now in your houses with our coronavirus. And so fighting took place, but out of this, the cream rises to the top, and the cream tended were the Angles. And there is an Angle king who will finally unite all of these tribes together to form our real first civilization in Great Britain. He called that land Angle Land, and from Angle Land, we get the word England. Anglo Saxon culture, as it will become known, is what it will dominate the English civilization. Later on, we're going to talk about a Frankish king by the name of William the Conqueror, who will also bring French culture into English culture. But for the most part, we even still refer to culture that comes from England as Anglo Saxon culture. All right, let's practice. Again, I wanted to mention that we also have Muslims who are going to be invading this area. Remember that they had, oh, my cursor's fallen. They crawled around here, crawled across North Africa, and moved into Spain. And even when they were pushed back by Charles Martel, they were still here in these areas of North Africa and would make raids into Italy and into southern portions of France. So, the Vikings, the Magyars, the Muslims, and now we have these poor Europeans. Help, we are being invaded, and there is no one to protect us. What will we do? The answer is something called feudalism, and that's what most of this unit is about. Feudalism will be the answer, and it is basically an exchange of land for protection or labor or loyalty. Kings had land, and that's all they had. So they would use that land to their benefit. King would give a land to a noble. In turn, that noble who had to raise an army for the king would give portions of his land to a lesser lord called a knight. In exchange, he would provide military service. And then all of these groups give protection to the peasants and serfs. Remember, land is only valuable if it is worked. You need the peasants, the serfs, to work the land. So they would provide food and service in exchange for that protection. The knights would provide protection and loyalty to the nobles. The nobles would provide the knights the loyalty and money in the form of taxes to kings. It was a very useful system, maybe not so much for peasants, but you're going to get a lot into that later on. All right, guys, that's it for now. Thanks. Bye.